big piece of that cost is risk. People are betting on things getting worse. That old joke, you know, when you're in a hole, you should stop digging. Why do we continue to cause the price of oil to rise by continuing to rattle a saber with Iran? Why do we continue to cause the price of oil to rise by a foreign policy that is absolutely morbid of any center? And what we have to do immediately to take care of those people in Iowa and New Hampshire is provide for emergency fuel assistance.
Senator Edwards.
Well, what we can do in the short term, and I will do as President, is ensure that my Justice Department investigates what these oil companies who are vertically integrated, you know, from refinery to pump, are doing. But I think there's something else that we've talked a lot about being straight with people tonight. I think it's really important. Every 4 years, the presidential candidates roll through Iowa and New Hampshire, promise this, promise that, promise this. Here's the truth. We need to ask Americans to be patriotic about something other than war. And I want to be the president who says to America, we're in this together. We're going to have to be willing to sacrifice. If we love this country enough, we're going to have to conserve in our homes and our workplaces and alter our behavior to make America what it's capable of being.
Senator Clinton.
Well, I agree with everything that my colleagues have just said. I think it's important that we do have enough money in LIHEAP. It's a battle we fight every year against the Republicans. That's the program to help consumers pay their bills. We should have a crash program on weatherization, which will help to drive those bills down. We need to do more to investigate, as John says, and we might even have to look at the Strategic Petroleum Reserve, which the Bush administration has been filling up beyond any expectation of need for the short term at least. But we also have to have a serious move toward energy efficiency and conservation, and that is where we need to get people to be more conscious to do it for themselves.
Senator Obama.
As Joe pointed out, out of the $90 that's costing right now for a barrel, about 30% of that is just risk. It's not dictated by supply and demand. If we can lower the rhetoric with respect to military action in the Middle East, that will have an immediate impact. All the other suggestions that have been made are sound. But one of the things that we have to do with respect to conservation is increase fuel efficiency standards on cars. And we have to make that commitment not just by going to environmentalist groups and saying we're going to do it, but doing what I did, which is go to Detroit, talking to the automakers. Joe and I have been working on legislation that would provide them the incentives to start making those shifts.
Congressman Kucinich.
Everyone knows that the war against Iraq was about oil. This administration is trying to gain control of Iraq's oil with the help of Congress. It's time we had a president who stood for the Constitution and international law. And that's exactly what I'll do. Everyone knows that the saber rattling against Iran is driving up the price of oil. We have to stop the war in Iraq, bring our troops home, end the occupation, have an international security and peacekeeping force that moves in as our troops leave. We have to stop planning for war against Iran. We have to insist that we enforce the Constitution of the United States, which this President continues to violate. And again, I state that the President and the Vice President should be subject to impeachment. Then we can start to get control of our energy policies by rejecting this doctrine of preemption, which is not worthy of this nation.
Thank you, Congressman. Governor Richardson.
You need an energy revolution in this country, an Apollo program that does the following. One, reduces consumption of fossil fuels by 50% by 2020. Fuel efficiency, I'm going to be specific, 50 miles per gallon. A renewable portfolio standard, in other words, all electricity in America, 30% renewable sources. Reduce greenhouse gas emissions by 80% by 2040, by 30% by 2020, a cap and trade system. Energy efficiency too. You got to ask the American people to sacrifice a little bit. What does that mean? That means when we use appliances, mass transit, air conditioning, that we all bound together to reduce this dependence on foreign oil that affects our national security when 65% of your oil is imported. When the planet is polluted by fossil fuels and man-made pollution, it is American leadership, and it's presidential leadership, and it has to be an energy revolution, not these little energy bills that the Congress keeps passing that are meaningless.
Thank you, Governor. A question for Senator Dodd, a question to you alone, Senator, about this intersection of environment and sacrifice. So many people have been saddened by the pictures these past few days from Southern California. There are reports that major cities in the state of Georgia are threatened with running out of drinking water water in a matter of days. Are you truly prepared to lead on a national scale the kind of sacrifice it would require where it intersects with the environment?
Well, I think you've got to, I find it somewhat startling here that Ronald Reagan's former Secretary of State and George Bush's first chief economic advisor are frankly more courageous and bold on energy policy than my fellow competitors here for this job, the presidency. I've called for a corporate carbon tax. All of us share the same goals here of achieving energy independence, reducing our dependency on fossil fuels and the carbons they emit. But you're not going to achieve that unless you deal with price, quite frankly, here. And there's a direct correlation between continuing a policy that produces the CO2 emissions and the health hazards to our country and the climate change problems here. You've got to deal with price because, frankly, consumers are not going to be in a position where they can afford the more expensive fuels, the alternative fuels and technologies. So the corporate carbon tax, taxing carbon, is a critical element if you're going to achieve this kind of energy change we need in our country. That directly bears on the kinds of problems we're seeing. There's no doubt in my mind that there's a correlation between what you've just described, Brian, and energy policy here, not to mention the national security and economic security risks as a result of our continuing dependence on fossil fuels, particularly oil out of the Middle East. So those are things that I advocate, that no one else does on this stage here this evening. Al Gore has called it the most